Welcome to Life Stories, where we dive into the real, raw experiences that shape who we are. Today's story is about Sarah, a woman who spent years building a life of independence and success, only to find herself facing her past in a way she never expected, when an invitation from her estranged family forces her to confront the truth about her upbringing. Sarah must decide whether to return to a family that never truly understood her, or to continue living life on her own terms. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and join us as we begin today's powerful journey. I never expected my grandmother's call to trigger such a cascade of memories and emotions. But here I was, at 29, looking back on a life I had spent years trying to bury. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and on the surface, I had everything I had ever dreamed of. I held a senior position at Thompson and Harris Investments, the kind of role that most people in my field spent their entire careers trying to reach. My apartment in downtown New York City was everything I had ever wanted: modern, sleek, and perched above the hustle and bustle of the city I had learned to love. I had built a life that felt like a success in every way. But in reality, it was all a carefully crafted illusion. You see, beneath the polished surface, my life had been a series of carefully calculated moves, each one designed to distance myself from a family that had never truly cared about me. I had carved out a place for myself where I could finally be free from the weight of expectations, from the constant feeling of being the unwanted child, and from the painful memories that I had carried for years. The phone call came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. It was my grandmother's voice, familiar and warm, cutting through the silence of my apartment. "Sarah, sweetie, it's Grandma," she said, her voice tinged with that comforting old warmth that only a grandmother's love can provide. "I just wanted to let you know that your parents and Emily have moved into their new house." She paused, and I could almost hear the hesitation in her voice, the careful choice of words. "They're planning a housewarming party in 3 weeks." I couldn't help but smirk at the mention of the party. "Are you and Grandpa going?" I asked, knowing full well the answer. "No, dear," she replied, a sigh slipping through the phone. "We're not feeling well enough for all that noise and commotion. Your grandfather's arthritis is acting up again." I could picture her sitting in her favorite armchair, perhaps knitting another scarf as she spoke. My grandparents had always been the ones who truly cared about me, the only people in my family who had ever made me feel like I belonged. I felt a surge of genuine concern as she spoke about Grandpa's health, but I didn't linger on it. "Take care of yourselves," I said. "I'll visit you both soon." "That would be lovely, dear. We miss you." She paused again, and for a moment, I thought she was going to say something more, something that might finally bring some clarity to the tangled mess of emotions that had existed between us for so long. But instead, she spoke softly. "Sarah, I know things are complicated, but maybe, Grandma." I cut her off gently, my voice soft but firm. "We both know they won't invite me. And that's fine." She didn't argue. There was no need to. We both knew the truth. My parents had never made an effort to be a family. And Emily, my younger sister, had always been the apple of their eye. She was the one who got all the attention, all the affection, all the praise. And I was simply the child they had never wanted in the first place. I was the result of a mistake, a consequence they never fully embraced. After hanging up, I stood by my floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the sprawling city below. The skyline glittered in the fading light of the afternoon, a world of possibilities stretching out before me. My reflection stared back at me, a successful woman in a tailored suit, far removed from the unwanted child I once was. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents' new house was probably modest compared to my luxurious apartment, but they would never know that. I had made sure to keep my success private, staying off social media for years. The world I had built was mine, and I had no intention of sharing it with the people who had never cared enough to ask. But as I stood there, the quiet hum of the city settling around me, something shifted. Something deep inside me stirred. The call from my grandmother. The news of the housewarming party, it all felt like a trigger, pulling me back into a past I had spent so long trying to forget. I didn't want to go to the party. I didn't want to see them, to face the people who had hurt me so deeply. But the truth was, I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted anymore. I had built a life on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I found myself questioning whether it had been worth it. I was so tired of being alone, of carrying the weight of my past all by myself. But I also knew that no matter how successful I became, no matter how much money I made or how many accolades I received, there would always be a part of me that longed for the love I had never received. And maybe, just maybe, this party could offer me a glimpse of the family I had always dreamed of. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I wasn't going to find it in the carefully curated life I had created. The housewarming party, maybe it would be my chance to finally face the people who had shaped me, for better or for worse, and to see if there was any part of me they still recognized. I didn't know yet if I would go, but the thought lingered in the back of my mind as I turned away from the window and started to prepare for the next chapter of my life, whatever it might hold. The following day, as I sipped my morning coffee and scrolled aimlessly through my phone, I was jolted by a message from Megan. "Don't you dare back out of your birthday party tomorrow," she texted, her words devoid of preamble. As always, Megan had been my closest friend since college, and she had always been the one to push me out of my comfort zone. "I've already ordered the cake and convinced half the office to come," she continued, her excitement palpable through the screen. I couldn't help but laugh. That's quite the feat, considering I haven't told anyone about the party. You need to celebrate, Sarah. You're about to turn 30. And you're crushing it at life. Let's show it off a little. Take some photos, post them online, and let the world see that Sarah Mitchell is living her best life. I hesitated. For years, I had kept my life private, preferring to keep a low profile and avoid any connection to my past. The idea of sharing photos and showcasing my success felt uncomfortable, almost like I was putting myself on display. But Megan's words lingered in my mind. I had worked hard for everything I had. Maybe it was time to stop hiding and let people see the life I had built for myself. "Fine," I finally replied. "But nothing too crazy." "Too late," she responded instantly. "I've already hired a photographer." I rolled my eyes. But the truth was, part of me was secretly excited. Megan always knew how to bring a bit of sparkle into my otherwise regimented life. The photographer she hired was top-notch. And when the photos were ready, I could hardly believe what I saw. My apartment, which had always felt like a solitary haven to me, looked like something straight out of an architectural magazine. The marble countertops gleamed under the soft lighting, and the city lights twinkled through the windows, casting a golden glow on everything in sight. In those photos, everything looked perfect, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. For the first time in years, I let myself imagine what it would be like to share my success with the world. The photos went up on my social media accounts, and within minutes, the likes and comments began pouring in. Former classmates, colleagues, and even distant relatives all marveled at the life I had created for myself. It felt strange, almost surreal, like I was finally shedding the layers of my past and allowing the world to see the person I had become. "Look at you, girl," Megan exclaimed as she scrolled through the comments. "Your post is blowing up." I glanced at my phone. The notifications were relentless. Each new message brought a wave of satisfaction, but also a strange emptiness. I had worked so hard for this, yet a small part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The next morning, just as I was preparing for the day, my phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID read Mom. My stomach clenched. I hadn't heard from her in months. My hand trembled as I picked up the phone. "Sarah. It's Mom." Her voice was artificially cheerful, and I could feel the distance between us in every word she spoke. "I got your number from Grandma. I saw your photos online. And I must say, Your apartment is impressive. We had no idea you were doing so well. Of course. You didn't. I thought bitterly. You never bothered to ask. We're having that housewarming party next weekend, she continued. Her voice now laced with something almost desperate. We'd love for you to come. Everyone would be so happy to see you. I took a deep breath. My heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't understand why. After all these years, they were suddenly reaching out to me. My mind raced through the memories of the past, the neglect, the years of silence, and I felt a surge of resentment bubble up from deep within. I'll think about it, I replied coldly, my voice betraying nothing of the turmoil I felt. I'll think about it. Mom. Before she could respond, I ended the call, my finger hovering over the screen as I stared at the flashing end call button. I didn't want to engage with her. I didn't want to be sucked back into that toxic, manipulative world. But the truth was, the invitation had stirred something in me, something I hadn't felt in years. I sat down on the edge of my couch, staring out the window at the city below. The quiet hum of the traffic, the distant sounds of life outside, seemed to echo the unease I felt inside. The housewarming party, what was the real reason they were inviting me now? Was it genuine? Or was it just because they had seen my success, seen the life I had built, and now they wanted a piece of it? The emotions that stirred inside me were like a flood, overwhelming and unpredictable. I was angry, hurt, and even a little ashamed. All these years, I had convinced myself that I was better off without them. But now, I wasn't so sure. Maybe I was still searching for something. Some closure. Some acknowledgement. Some validation. The thought of going to the party filled me with dread. But I also couldn't deny that a part of me longed for something more. It wasn't about forgiveness. Not entirely. It was about something deeper, a need to finally understand where I stood in their eyes. To see if there was any part of me they still cared for. I stood up, walking across the room as I let the reality of the situation sink in. The party was just a few days away. I hadn't made a decision yet. But I knew one thing for sure, whether I went or not. The past was never going to be as easily buried as I had hoped. It would always be there, lurking in the background, shaping who I was, and who I could still become. The decision to go to the housewarming party wasn't an easy one. I spent the days leading up to it torn between feelings of anger, betrayal, and something I couldn't quite identify. There was a part of me that wanted to confront them, to expose the truth and show them exactly how much I had achieved without their help. But there was also a quiet part of me that longed for some semblance of connection, some sense of family, even if it was a fractured version of what I had once dreamed it would be. The morning of the party, I found myself pacing around my apartment. The room was filled with the quiet hum of city life outside my windows. But inside, everything felt unsettled. I knew I had to go. Part of me wanted to see them, wanted to prove to myself that I was no longer the unwanted child, the mistake they had tried to bury. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the invitation wasn't genuine. My mother hadn't called me in months. And now, out of the blue, she was reaching out because she had seen my photos online. It felt like a game, a way to stake a claim on me now that I had something they could envy. I dressed in a simple, tailored dress. Nothing too flashy, but still elegant. My reflection in the mirror seemed foreign to me in that moment. I had grown so used to being alone, to taking care of myself, that I wasn't sure how to navigate the world of family anymore. As I applied a final touch of lipstick, I paused. Was I doing this for them? Or for me? What was I hoping to achieve by going? But the question I had been avoiding pressed on me. Did I even have a choice anymore? By the time I arrived at their house, it felt like an eternity had passed since that phone call. The modest two-story home sat in a middle-class neighborhood, far from the sleek, high-rise apartment I had built for myself. It was nice, sure, but it didn't compare to the life I had created. No marble countertops, no city skyline views. It was a home that reflected who my parents had always been. Ordinary and unremarkable. But as I stood there at the curb, with the familiar sounds of laughter floating through the open windows. I realized that I didn't care about the house. It was never about the house, it was about the people inside. And those people had always been a mystery to me. I took a deep breath and grabbed the housewarming gift I had picked out, an expensive bottle of wine that I knew they couldn't afford. I had chosen it carefully, thinking it would be a small, ironic gesture. After all, I had built my life without them. And now, I was showing up to their door, as if everything could be swept away with a bottle of Merlot. When I walked up the path to the front door, the moment felt surreal. It had been 11 years since I had last been here, and as I knocked, I could feel the weight of that time pressing down on me. The years had passed in silence, years where I had distanced myself from them, where I had built a life that was mine, untouched by their indifference. And yet, when the door opened, I saw them standing there, the facade of family still intact. My mother's arms opened wide, her voice sweeter than I had heard it in years. "Sarah. Oh my goodness. It's been forever," she said, her words laced with a warmth that seemed rehearsed. I felt a pang of resentment at the sight of her carefully controlled smile, and the way she greeted me as if she hadn't been a stranger for the last decade. Behind her, my father stood, his face more weathered than I remembered, but his eyes still carried that same coldness. And then, there was Emily, my sister, looking exactly the same, though her smile was more practiced now. She was standing just a step behind them, as if waiting for the perfect moment to make her appearance. The room was filled with the sounds of relatives greeting one another, and for a moment, I stood there in the doorway, unsure of what to do. My heart was heavy with the weight of the years gone by. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to turn around and leave. I had come this far. After all, where have you been hiding all these years? One of my aunts asked, her voice almost too loud, as if she were trying to convince herself that everything was normal. I forced a smile, giving the answer they expected to hear. "Oh, you know. Busy with work," I said, my voice steady but distant. As I stepped inside, I felt all eyes on me, curious, judgmental, almost invasive. There were whispers about my apartment, comments about how successful I seemed. "We saw your photos online," another relative chimed in. "You look so glamorous. New York must be wonderful." The conversation quickly turned to my life in the city, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being put on display. It was as if my success, my independence, was the only thing that mattered to them now. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about me, it was about what they saw in me. They saw a success story, a symbol of what they could never achieve. And now, they wanted to claim that success for themselves. I scanned the room, my gaze flicking from face to face, looking for any sign of genuine connection, any hint that they cared about me for who I was, not just for what I had become. But there was nothing, just the familiar feeling of being a spectacle, a figure to be admired but never truly known. The evening unfolded in a haze of small talk, forced laughter, and strained smiles. As the night wore on, the realization hit me, this was it. This was the family I had fought so hard to distance myself from. And as much as they had hurt me, as much as I had longed for their love, I knew in that moment that I was better off without them. They had never seen me for who I truly was, and I wasn't about to let them start now. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that settled within me. Despite the smiles, the forced congratulations, and the mock warmth from my family, something was missing. They had never truly seen me, not for who I was, but for the image they had painted in their minds. And now, they were pretending to care because of what I had achieved, not because they ever bothered to understand me as a person. When the party began to wind down, I excused myself, offering a polite goodbye to the relatives who had barely acknowledged me over the years. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a sense of finality. This chapter of my life was over, and I had nothing left to prove to them. As I walked out the door and into the cool night, The weight I had carried for so long began to lift. I realized that the life I had built was mine. And it was enough. I didn't need their approval. Nor did I need to carry the burden of their indifference. What mattered now was that I had learned to live for myself. To embrace my own worth without waiting for anyone else to validate it. Looking back at the house, the familiar facade of family crumbling in the distance, I felt a sense of peace I had never known before. I had let go of the past. And for the first time, I was truly free. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more life lessons, make sure to subscribe to the channel for the latest videos in our Life Stories series. You won't want to miss what's coming next.